Please join me in welcoming, live from Washington, D.C., U.S. Senator Ted Cruz. Well, Senator, that was the shot of the night, I think. Welcome. Good to see you.
It's good to see you, Evan. I'm sorry it's long distance and not in person.
Well, we're happy to have you in any case, and we'll do the best we can and make this a really robust conversation.
Very good.
I thought we might begin with the news of today. Of course, I wanted to talk about the news of the week, and you were the news of the week. But I thought we might begin with the news of the day. A couple of hours ago, President Obama announced that he had had a phone conversation with President Rouhani of Iran. As I understand it, this is the first official communication between the United States and Iran since 1979. Is this a good thing for the country?
Well, I think as the President described his conversation and what the President said afterwards, there were troubling elements in them, particularly where he suggested that Iran has a right to nuclear technology. In my view, that suggestion is quite inconsistent with U.S. national security interests. And I would note the timing is interesting. Yesterday, I had the privilege to go outside the White House and participate in a prayer vigil that a number of pastors organized, because it was the one-year anniversary of the imprisonment of an American pastor, Saeed Abedini, who was imprisoned in the notorious Evin prison in Tehran for preaching the Christian faith. And he was sentenced to prison. He has been brutalized and denied medical attention. And this prayer vigil was an ecumenical prayer vigil to remember Pastor Abedini and to pray for his release, for his safekeeping. And at the time, I took a moment to describe a resolution that I introduced in the Senate that I hope to get a number of Senate co-sponsors, that says before President Obama would agree to sit down with the Iranian president, that it is the sense of the Senate that he should insist upon two preconditions. One, that he should affirm the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. And the reason that's important is, the media has described the new Iranian president as a quote, moderate. And yet this is a man who has referred to Israel as a wound that must be cleaned off and erased. And so I think it's very important, if the U.S. president is going to sit down with him, to have him at the very minimum acknowledge Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, number one, and number two, release his political prisoners, including the pastor Abedini, who has been in prison simply for preaching his Christian faith.
So you intend to press this as we go forward?
Indeed.
Very well. So let's talk about your week. How was your week?
It's been pretty quiet, Evan. Not much of anything going on.
Got a lot of sleep. Very well rested here at the end of the week.
Yeah. But by and large, yes.
What, Senator Cruz, did you intend to accomplish, and what, in the end, did you accomplish?
Well, my hope was this week would serve a role helping elevate in the public debate the harms that are coming from Obamacare. Obamacare, after three and a half years after it's passed, it is now clear this thing isn't working, and there are millions of Americans who are suffering under Obamacare. And my effort, and I hope and believe we made some significant progress, was getting the American people focused and talking about all of the millions of Americans who are hurting because of Obamacare, who are not able to find jobs because of Obamacare, who are losing their jobs, who are being forced into part-time work, working 29 hours a week, who are facing skyrocketing health insurance premiums, or who are losing their health insurance altogether or at risk of losing their health insurance. And I do think that over the course of the week, we had some real success pressing that public debate, getting the American people engaged, and providing an outlet for the American people to be heard in Washington.
Right. Now, you went into it knowing that the votes would be hard to come by to prevent what happened today, which is a stripping of the defund provision,
right,
and then the returning of the spending bill back to the House. You knew going into this, uphill battle.
Indeed.
Yeah, but still worth in your mind doing it.
Very much so. And look, Evan, this was always intended to be a multi-stage process. I have never went into this battle with a Pollyannish view that this was going to be an easy path. When we announced this effort to defund Obamacare roughly 2 months ago, we knew it was uphill then. And my view was the first stage was to energize and engage the American people. So I spent much of the month of August touring the state of Texas, touring the country, working to get people engaged. There was a national website that was launched, don'tfundit.com. Nearly 1.9 million Americans have signed the national petition at don'tfundit.com.
Right.
That's the predicate for the second stage,
which
was last week the House of Representatives voting overwhelmingly to defund Obamacare. Now, a couple of weeks ago, every pundit, every media commentator in Washington said that would never happen, and yet that's exactly what the House did, and I think they did it as a direct result of 1.9 million Americans mobilizing, reaching out, and calling on their elected officials to do the right thing.
Right.
The third stage played out this week, and that was moving to the Senate. It had been my hope in this third stage that Senate Republicans would unite. That proved not to be the case.
Didn't exactly happen. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And so today, the Senate Democrats, with the assistance of some Senate Republicans, were able to vote to fund Obamacare and to send the continuing resolution back to the House. Now, I think that's unfortunate, but the process is not nearly over. Now that it's back in the House, I have every hope, every confidence. The House is going to stand strong, is going to continue listening to the American people, and is going to pass a continuing resolution that makes some real progress mitigating the harms that are coming from Obamacare. And when that happens, it'll come back to the Senate. And I hope that'll provide a real opportunity for Senate Republicans to unify. I hope that we see all 46 Senate Republicans standing arm in arm with the House Republicans alongside the American people, working to address the very real harms and suffering that's being caused by Obamacare.
Senator, are you talking directly to House members to give them guidance on how they should act next? There was a National Review story this afternoon that suggested you're telling conservative House members to disregard, to disobey Speaker Boehner. Is that true?
A lot of silly things have been written in this process. I know that in your business you can't imagine any time journalism might get the facts a little bit wrong.
No, it's impossible to imagine that. That's right. Yeah, yeah. But I guess it's a yes or no question. Did you tell them to disregard Speaker Boehner?
Look, of course we have had lots of conversations with lots of House members.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't hear no. Just making sure I didn't hear no.
Nor did you hear yes.
Nor did I hear yes.
Because, as is usually the case,
right?
As is usually the case, it's not a binary choice.
Right.
Of course, we've had lots of conversations ongoing throughout this whole process,
right,
with lots of House members. Listen, at the end of the day, every member of the House is going to have to make a decision for himself or herself, because there are 435 elected members of the House, each one of whom represents their own district.
Right.
And the biggest thing that I have been urging people to do is listen to your constituents, listen to the suffering that is going on. And what I have been urging the House privately and publicly has been one and the same, which is stand your ground, fight for the men and women of your district, and fight to address the people who are losing their jobs, who are being pushed into part-time work, who are having their health care taken away. Fight to use the leverage we have to stand up for our constituents and to fix this train wreck that is Obamacare.
So, Senator, where do we go from here? What happens next? We know that there are only a couple days left until the deadline, after which time we're told government will be shut down. There are some people who say if only Senator Cruz hadn't talked for 21 hours, if only Senator Cruz had allowed the first vote of the Senate to be last night, Thursday, as opposed to Friday, there may have been enough time for this to play out and a government shutdown could have been avoided. I suspect that you don't share the view that you bear any responsibility.
Oh, look, there is plenty of time to avert a shutdown. I don't want a shutdown. I don't think we should have a shutdown.
Yeah.
The House, I hope, will move and move quickly to pass a new continuing resolution that also takes strong, decisive steps to stop the harms coming from Obamacare. And then, in my view, the Senate should act immediately. I'm still in Washington. I wish I were back in Texas.
Yeah.
I would love to be having dinner tonight at El Arroyo in Austin rather than up here in Washington, D.C.
Right.
But we got work to do. And so I'm staying here, getting ready for whenever the House passes the continuing resolution. From my end, I want to be ready to do everything I can to work to support the House Republicans and to continue trying to make the case with the American people.
Do you oppose a government shutdown?
I do not think we should have a government shutdown, and the only reason we might have a government shutdown is if Harry Reid and President Obama insist upon a government shutdown. The House has voted already once to fully fund the government.
You may have heard a reaction from the crowd there, Senator.
I am not surprised there may be some who disagree,
Yeah.
but the House has voted to fully fund the government.
Right.
I think we should fund every bit of the government except for Obamacare. And if Harry Reid and President Obama refuse to do that, if they insist on a shutdown, I think that's a mistake. I hope they don't do that.
Let me ask you where we go from here, Senator, in another respect, not procedurally, but substantively. Regardless of what happens this week, we have a problem in the state of Texas. A quarter of Texans, according to the U.S. Census Bureau report this last week, a quarter of your constituents have no health insurance. We're first in the nation, and it's a chronic problem, not a new one. And yet we hear that there's a better answer out there than the one the federal government is offering. Let me take you at your word and then ask you, can you please tell me what that answer is? I've heard a lot from you and from other opponents of the Affordable Care Act about what you're against. Please tell us what you're for. Tell us what the alternative is.
Well, let me answer that question in two parts. Let me talk first of all about the impact of Obamacare on health care in Texas, and then secondly, let me answer directly the reforms I think we should do to health care once we have repealed Obamacare.
All right.
The first piece, if you look at the many people who don't have access to health care in Texas, the driving reason is cost, that the cost of health insurance is too high and or that their income is not high enough to be able to afford it. And I think Obamacare has had very negative impacts across the board in that regard. We have seen, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did a survey of small businesses covered by the mandate. It found that half of them were forcing employees into part-time work or were shifting to more part-time workers, and another 24% were staying small or staying under 50 employers to avoid the mandate of Obamacare. So for people who, you talk about the Texans that don't have health insurance, the best way for them to get health insurance is to get a good-paying job, and Obamacare is the single biggest job killer in the country. When I have traveled the state of Texas and sat down with Texans all over the state, particularly if you talk with small business owners,
Yep.
over and over again, they list Obamacare as the biggest impediment to hiring Texans, to creating new jobs. And if you look at it from the perspective of a young person coming out of school, trying to get a job, Obamacare is making it much, much harder. If you look at it from the perspective of a single mom, struggling, let's say she's waiting tables trying to provide for her kids, because of Obamacare, she's having her hours forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week. She's not getting health care, and she can't feed her kids on 29 hours a week. And then, one of the things that I tried to do during the filibuster this week is read from stories from Texans all across our great state who are losing their health insurance. Just a few weeks ago, UPS sent letters to 15,000 employees saying, we're dropping your spousal coverage. All your husbands and wives are losing their coverage and are losing their health insurance coverage. And I read letter after letter from retired couples, from people with disabilities who are losing their health insurance. Indeed, we're seeing that happen all over the place. So Obamacare is exacerbating that problem. One of the things it's done, for example, is it has banned high-deductible insurance policies. So if anyone had a catastrophic policy, which is typically less expensive, those are becoming illegal, so all the people that have them are getting dumped. And the problem is, if you lower the deductible, it makes the policy much, much more expensive. So there are a lot of people who now can't afford it and used to be able to. So Obamacare is making this problem much, much worse. And by the way, you don't have to take my word for it. One of the things that several times on the Senate floor I read from was a letter that James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters, wrote to Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. And he said that he was writing on behalf of millions of working men and women and the families who depend upon them, and that Obamacare was destroying their health care. And destroying is the word he used, and millions is the word he used. So if you don't believe me, a Republican politician, it may say something that James Hoffa, the head of one of the nation's largest unions, who actively supported President Obama and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, has put in writing that Obamacare is destroying the health care of millions of Americans. So that's the first piece. Let me answer the second piece now. After Obamacare is repealed, I think we need to do serious reforms to improve health care. And I think those reforms should expand competition and should empower individuals and patients. And I'll give you three specifics.
Okay.
Number one, I think we should allow people to purchase health insurance across state lines. Right now, that's illegal. And if you could purchase insurance across state lines, it would create a true national marketplace, which would drive the availability of low-cost, catastrophic policies. And as we talked about before, the biggest barrier to access is cost. And the more national competition, the lower cost policies we have, the more individuals that will be able to purchase health insurance. Number two, I think we should expand health savings accounts so people can save in a tax-advantaged way to meet routine preventive care and things short of catastrophic illness or injury.
All right.
And number three, we should work to delink health insurance from employment. I mean, it's, as you know, Evan, it's an historical accident that health insurance is tied to employment. And it actually arose coming out of World War II when we had wage and price controls in place and employers couldn't raise wages, so they were looking for ways to attract employees. And they began offering health insurance. But the problem is, if you or I lose our job, if we get fired, if we leave our job, you don't lose your car insurance, you don't lose your house insurance, you don't lose your life insurance. There's no reason on earth you should lose your health insurance, and of all of them, it's the worst one to lose. And so I think we should change the federal tax laws so that we can encourage the development of personal, portable health insurance plans, just like your car insurance, that go with you regardless of what job you're in. And doing that goes a long way to solving the problem of pre-existing conditions. Now, all of those reforms, I'll note, Evan, have a very different philosophy than Obamacare. They're all about empowering you, the individual, the patient, to make health care decisions with your doctor, rather than the Obamacare approach, which is empowering federal bureaucracies to get in between you and your doctor in personal health care decisions that I don't think the federal government should be making for you.
All right. There was a crowd reaction of a different sort, actually. You heard that. Let me move off of
I
the
appreciate
specific,
it.
I know you do. Let me move off of the specific question of the Affordable Care Act and to what we witnessed from the standpoint of the Republican Party at war to some degree with itself over the last 48 to 72 hours. A number of your fellow Republicans claim to be with you on defunding the Affordable Care Act, but they came after you in a big way, no mercy, on your tactics. I'm talking about the Tom Coburns and the Bob Corkers and the John McCains of the world. I assume these folks are all off your Christmas card list.
No, they're actually all 99 other senators remain very much on my Christmas card list.
You're not concerned, Senator, about the reaction of your fellow Republicans this week? I mean, it really got ugly there after a while, and there were names called, and I mean, I thought the situation with you and Senator Corker last night particularly was kind of the crescendo of Republicans fighting Republicans this week.
Well, I mean, listen, Evan, I do think it was unfortunate that Republicans were divided. I wish that hadn't happened. I did everything I could and tried very hard to urge Republicans to be unified in the Senate, standing with House Republicans. That didn't happen. And I will note there were some who chose to get very personal, to hurl a lot of personal insults. My approach is I have not reciprocated, and I don't intend to reciprocate.
Yep.
Part of it is, I think, those who don't want to see Obamacare defunded want very much to change the subject. So a lot of the media coverage, it's sort of like Hollywood gossip columns. It's all about personalities, this person versus that person, and this personal insult, this anonymous congressional staffer with this nasty little line, and that drives a whole bunch of coverage. And frankly, Evan, my view, I think most Americans could not care less about a bunch of politicians in Washington. I don't think any of us matter to most Americans. What they're interested in is what's going to make a difference in my family, in my life, what's going to produce economic growth and jobs. And so I have endeavored as much as humanly possible to if others want to attack me, fine, I'm not going to respond, I'm not going to defend myself. I'm going to try with all my might to keep the focus on the substance, how Obamacare is hurting jobs, the economy is threatening our health care, and how we need to step forward and defend those millions of Americans who are suffering the negative consequences of Obamacare.
You've kind of answered my next question, Senator. I was going to ask you how much of a problem it is for you to have official establishment Washington against you. I mean, in some ways, it sounds like it may be a plus. The more they don't like you in D.C., the more they like you outside of D.C. So actually, if John McCain or Lindsey Graham are saying nasty things about you, your response might be, keep it up.
Well, look, with every senator here, I have at all times treated them or endeavored to treat them with civility and respect. But at the same time, I try to keep very much in mind for whom I work. And I have 26 million bosses that are the 26 million Texans, and I take very seriously my obligation to do my best to work for every Texan. Those who supported me and those who voted against me and passionately disagree, I'm still going to work to do my very best to fight for every Texan. And so I'm far more focused on what 26 million Texans want and think and believe and need than I am with getting invited to the next cocktail party in Washington. Frankly, I don't really like cocktail parties anyway.
Now, you say you didn't reciprocate as they called names. I do remember during the 21 hours you pointing out that any Republican who voted for cloture following your speech was essentially voting with the Democrats to fund Obamacare. And you called the cloture vote the most important vote that you've taken in those 9 months. Well, you know who voted for cloture? Mitch McConnell voted for cloture. So do you now feel like you're on the opposite side of your leader? And will you, as some have suggested, now endorse Mitch McConnell's Tea Party opponent, Matt Blevin, in the Republican primary coming up?
Well, I've said publicly that in all likelihood I am going to stay out of all incumbent Senate races, either for or against, and I expect to continue that policy.
Right.
I'll say more broadly, listen, on the cloture vote, the Republican conference in the Senate was divided roughly in half. I wish we'd been unified. I wish we had seen all 46 Republicans stand together alongside the House Republicans and against giving Harry Reid the power to fund Obamacare, but that was not to be.
Yeah.
I am very much at this stage looking forward because we're going to have another iteration. This is not done.
Yeah.
The House of Representatives, I'm confident, is going to act. It's going to act decisively. It's going to act boldly. And when it does so, when the continuing resolution comes back to the Senate, my hope is that'll present an opportunity for Republicans to come home and for all of us to be unified. I'm certainly doing everything I can internally to encourage that, and I hope that's what results.
So all will be forgiven at that point?
From my perspective, the focus is on the substance. If we can step forward and substantively help the American people address the harms that are coming from Obamacare, then that's a major victory for the American people, and that's where my focus is.
Well, I have to ask you about one more senator who voted for cloture and who has had his ears boxed for that. Senator, what's the deal with you and John Cornyn?
Oh, look, John Cornyn is our senior senator. He is a friend. He and I have voted side by side on virtually every issue. We disagreed on this issue. I disagree with how he voted. He disagreed with how I voted. That is part of politics. But I think that Texans are perfectly capable of assessing every elected official and assessing our record. And I like and respect John Cornyn, and I'm honored to serve with him.
But you've declined to endorse him in a nothing primary. It would cost you nothing to endorse your colleague, which would be typical Senate protocol, to endorse your colleague in a re-election effort that, again, is not really contested. And the upshot of your not endorsing him is that you now have a bunch of good Tea Party folks in Texas who may be taking their cues from you, but in any case, after the last couple of days, are calling for his head. You could put a stop to this. Endorse him right now. Will you do it?
Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, I think it is very likely I'm going to stay out of all incumbent primaries. And listen, part of the reason why I'm doing that is Evan, you remember very well the journey that we traveled during the Senate campaign last year, where when I started, we were at 2% in the polls. No one thought we had a prayer.
Right.
And we went through a $50 million primary. We were outspent 3-1. And what happened in that race is that thousands upon thousands of grassroots activists, of Republican women, of Tea Party leaders, of business leaders, of community leaders, knocked on doors and got on the phone and got on email and got on Facebook and got on Twitter. And thanks to that incredible grassroots army, we went from 2% in the polls to not just winning, but winning the primary by 14 points, winning the general by 16 points. Now, you mentioned a minute ago the typical thing in Washington to do would be to endorse every Republican.
Right.
And frankly, I feel I owe a commitment to the men and women all across Texas of the grassroots. I think every incumbent owes it to the grassroots activists of their state to make the case why he or she should be reelected. I think that's true nationally.
Yeah.
And if I went to Washington and became just another Washington politician who immediately endorses every incumbent, I think I'd be breaking faith with the men and women who worked very hard to elect me.
Right, but you understand, Senator, that the practical effect of declining to endorse Senator Cornyn is that it's read by a lot of people that you're opposing Senator Cornyn.
Well, I mean, that's not remotely the case. And indeed, I have consistently gone out of my way to praise Senator Cornyn. It is a privilege to serve with him, and he is a friend. But I think every elected official owes it to the grassroots activists, owes it to the citizens, their constituents, to make the case in every election as to why they should continue serving. And that's true. That's true in every election across the country, and that's why, as I said, I'm likely going to stay out of all of the incumbent races because now I'm not anticipating supporting their challengers either. What I expect to do is leave it to the voters of the respective states to make the decision who is the best individual to fight for the citizens of that state.
Okay. You've mentioned the press a couple times, Senator. You've not been an enormous fan of how the press has covered you or has covered politics up to this point. And I wonder if you feel like the press hasn't treated you fairly, especially in the last couple days. A lot has been made of the comparisons in the press between your 21-hour speech and Wendy Davis's 11-hour filibuster here in the Texas legislature. And the rap has basically been the national media has made her into a folk hero and cast you as a jerk. Do you think that the press has shown its colors in the coverage of your situation this week versus Senator Davis?
Well, let me say a couple of things. One, I am certainly not working for the members of the press, with all due respect. My focus is on what 26 million Texans, what the men and women that I was elected to represent think and believe, and what, to the best of my ability, is I'm able to do to fight for their interest.
Yeah.
Number two, and I've said this before, I think the fact that the New York Times and other outlets are this hysterical about what I'm doing so early, it may just be a sign that I might be doing something right. And I can tell you, I've also joked, if the New York Times really wanted to damage me politically in the state of Texas, they'd start praising what
they can
what
endorse you. That's right, yeah.
I guarantee you, the next time I went to East Texas, someone would pull me aside and say, what the heck did you do wrong?
Right.
So, and let me say a broader point, which is, look, I don't have any complaints about the media treating me well or poorly because, frankly, it doesn't matter how the media treats me. I don't think most Texans or most Americans care about politicians. What I do care about, what I think most Americans care about, are the issues that are facing this country. And what I wish the media would do more of is, instead of following the back and forth of this attack, this personality, who's up, who's down,
right,
I wish the media would focus on the substance, on the issues, on how Obamacare is killing jobs, pushing people into part-time work, and taking away their health insurance, how people are suffering under Obamacare. Because, you know, it's interesting, Evan. Every poll that is done in Texas and actually across the country shows the very top priority of Americans all over the country is jobs in the economy. Usually it's more than 50% put jobs in the economy as their top priority. My single biggest frustration in the 9 months I've been in the Senate is we have spent virtually zero time even talking about jobs in the economy. I mean, it is simply not a priority in Harry Reid's Senate. So we spend 6 weeks talking about guns and taking away people's Second Amendment rights, and we spend virtually zero time talking about fundamental tax reform, about regulatory reform, about defunding Obamacare. And people wonder, why does Congress have 10, 12, 14% approval ratings? I would suggest it's because our elected representatives don't even talk about what the American people care about, much less stand up and show the urgency that people are hurting. We need economic growth back, we need jobs back, and we need opportunity so that it becomes far more achievable for people to climb the economic ladder and to achieve the American dream.
All right. On the subject of the press, Senator, I thought while I had you, I might do a little fact-checking. Can you please confirm or deny what was reported last week in GQ, in which a Harvard Law School classmate of yours said that you would study only with people who'd gone to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, and not with graduates of the, quote, minor Ivies? Now, my wife, who went to the University of Pennsylvania, is here tonight. She'd like to know, and as a good husband, I'd like to know, is that true?
It was complete and utter nonsense, and no, it was not true.
Never happened. Okay.
And in fact, we put out a statement shortly thereafter from a friend of mine and a law school classmate of mine,
yep,
who was a member of my law school study group and you know, was a graduate of Northwestern, a very fine institution. But look, the facts are nowhere near true. And you know, look, I understand journalists want to run around and print whatever stories they can find, and sometimes fact-checking is not a high priority for them.
Okay, so we've now just spiked that story. There we go. Okay. Quick politics questions before we open it up to questions from the audience. First, 2014, your old boss, Greg Abbott, is running for Texas governor. Looks like he may have a somewhat serious race this time, right? Got to say, first time in 20 years the Democrats will have had somebody with that kind of heat. Whether or not that race is winnable for a Democrat, it looks like a race that's going to attract a lot of attention, and it will be more competitive maybe than the last few governor's races. Would you mind handicapping that race? Do you have a point of view about that race?
Well, I don't know Wendy Davis. I've never met her. I obviously know Greg Abbott very, very well, and I think extremely highly of Greg Abbott. He is someone who has been a friend. He's been a mentor to me for many, many years. He hired me when I was 32 years old and gave me a chance to represent Texas. And he's someone who is very, very smart, very, very talented, very, very principled, and he's fearless. When I worked for him over and over again, his approach in the Attorney General's office, the marching orders that he would give every day is, let's do the right thing. Let's fight for the law. Let's fight for conservative principles. And I think the values that Greg Abbott believes that he is fighting for are the values of the state of Texas. I think Texas is a conservative state. And I think Greg Abbott is fighting for the values that are shared by the overwhelming majority of Texans.
Okay, let me ask you about the next race down on the ballot. Your old nemesis, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, is running for re-election against three challengers, all of whom, it should be noted, endorsed him and not you in the Senate race. You have any point of view about that race?
It is certainly an interesting race. I actually, disagree even with the characterization of nemesis. I have always liked David Dewhurst. I liked him before we ran against each other. I even liked him while we were running against each other. And I like him now. I think he's a good and decent man. The other individuals running, Todd Staples, Jerry Patterson, Dan Patrick, I know them all. I like and respect them. It's going to be an interesting race to watch. I don't know what's going to happen in that race. I certainly intend to stay out of it and watch with interest, as I expect a lot of other Texans will as well.
I imagine you'll stay as far out of it as possible, right? Stay as far away from it as you can. Let me ask you quickly about 2016. And I was obligated to do that before today, but then today, Public Policy Polling had a poll out of potential Republican candidates in 2016. And lo and behold, Senator, you are the #1 choice of Republicans nationally in this poll as a candidate for President of the United States. Are you going to run?
Look, Evan, I put very little stock in polls. I mean, I'm someone who, when we started the Senate campaign, if I trusted polls, when I looked at our first poll and saw that we were at 2% with a margin of error of 3%, I wouldn't have run.
Right.
So I don't put a whole lot of stock in polls. I got to tell you, my hands are full with the U.S. Senate, what we're doing right now. I mean, 100% of my focus. I'm in Washington, D.C. today instead of home with my little girls.
Right.
Because we're in a fight to turn this country around. And so, I know it's hard to believe, but I'm trying as much as possible not to focus on the politics and just focus on getting the job done. Just focus on standing up and fighting for the issues that matter in this country. And I think the Senate right now is the battleground for those issues, and that's where my focus is.
In fairness, Senator, you have gone to Iowa and New Hampshire. And if you're not running for president, who in the devil would go to Iowa and New Hampshire?
Well, I will point out that in the 9 months I've been in office, I've done, I think, 73 events in the state of Texas, have been to 28 Texas cities and 22 counties, have been to over a dozen states all over the country. And so, yes, those were 2 of the states, but I've gone all over the place. Yeah. And the reason is simple, which is, particularly in this fight to defund Obamacare, the only hope of prevailing in that fight was to energize and mobilize the grassroots in Texas and across the country. And so I have been happy to accept invitations to venues where I have an opportunity to connect with conservatives and to try to carry the message, to energize and mobilize them that the only way we're going to change Washington, the only way we're going to get elected officials to start listening to the people is if the people start holding our elected officials accountable. And so I certainly intend to continue to travel to any venues across the country that give me an opportunity to help build that grassroots movement, because I think that's what it's going to take to win these fights.
But you will consider such a bid at an appropriate time, just not now.
My focus is entirely on the Senate.
I'm going to work hard today to get you to say no, and I don't think I'm going to succeed, actually. So, all right, we're going to go to questions, Senator, from the audience now. We've got a packet of questions that are going to be walked up to me. Let's give Senator Cruz a hand for his willingness to answer my questions in this first part of the deal. Thank you, Emily. Emily Ramshaw, the editor of the Tribune, thank you very much. We'll use the balance of our time on questions for the senator from the audience. Okay, Senator, here's a question. I'm sorry there's not a questioner's name attached to it, but the questioner asks, how would you respond to those who believe that your views are too extreme to appeal to the moderate voters needed to win an election on a national level?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. Number one, listen, I think Washington, D.C. is a strange place where in Washington they describe it as extreme or as radical. To want to live within your means, not to want to bankrupt your kids and grandkids. I actually think if you get outside of Washington, D.C., there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on many, many issues. And whether it is that we've got to rein in out-of-control spending and our unsustainable debt in Washington, that's not a partisan issue in Texas. Most Texans agree with that. Or whether it is Obamacare. Outside of Washington, D.C., there is bipartisan agreement, substantial agreement, that Obamacare isn't working. There's a reason why the unions are jumping ship. It seems almost every day another one is saying, let us out, because the evidence is now so clear that it's not working. And so my focus is very much, my top priority every day since I have been elected has been working for economic growth, restoring economic growth, because I think economic growth is foundational to every other challenge we have. And Evan, in my view, economic growth, restoring opportunity, I think that is the essence of mainstream, common sense American values. The problem is Washington has stopped listening to common sense American values. Now let me make a second point related to that. If you look at the last four elections, 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012, in three of the last four, Republicans have gotten clobbered, 06, 08, and 12. The only elections of the last four that Republicans did well was 2010. Now, there was a difference. 2010, we stood for clear principles. We stood for economic growth. We stood for repealing Obamacare. We didn't paint in pale pastels. We instead drew a clear, positive, optimistic message, and that led to an overwhelming victory. When we paint in muddled pastels, Republicans get clobbered. And so I think the key to electoral victory is painting a different path than the path we're on, because the path we're on, it isn't working.
Okay. Another question. Will you give up your government paycheck if your party closes the government? You may have a problem with the premise of the question, but you understand the questioner's point. If the government shuts down, will you give up your government paycheck until the government comes back online?
I have a significant problem with the premise of the question, because I don't think we should shut down the government. And in fact, let me make an interesting point on this. Senator Rob Portman, Republican senator from Ohio, has a bill that would end government shutdowns. Look, everyone is annoyed by this government by crisis. We careen from one crisis to another to another. And what Senator Portman's bill would do is it says in the event that a continuing resolution isn't passed, that government continues and it ratchets down very, very slowly. So I think it drops 1% in 6 months and it tapers down from there. But it avoids a shutdown by putting that into permanent law. Harry Reid and the Democrats don't want to pass that, because it is in their interest politically to threaten a shutdown, to advance their political objective. I don't think we should threaten a shutdown. I just don't think we should affirmatively fund Obamacare. And that's what this fight is about, is are we going to affirmatively fund Obamacare? And it's not working and it's hurting the American people. So the only reason we might have a shutdown is if Harry Reid and President Obama tell the House of Representatives to go jump in a lake and refuse to pass the continuing resolution. They've passed one, they're going to pass another to fund the government.
Right.
And if they continue doing it, they may force a shutdown, and I think that'd be a mistake.
Senator, I'm going to ask the question again. Let's assume that it's Harry Reid or Barack Obama or the man in the moon who is responsible for the government shutdown. The question is asked in the conditional tense. Respectfully, if outside of your control, against your wishes, government shut down, will you give up, on the questioner's point, your government paycheck?
I will confess it is a question I have not given significant thought to, and so at least at the current time I have no intention to do so, but I don't think we should have a shutdown.
All right. Here's a question that's actually out of today's news, it turns out. The question is, what are your thoughts on same-sex marriage recognition in Texas? You may have heard, Senator, that today the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled that the state cannot prevent same-sex marriages from being recognized given the recent Supreme Court decision. What do you think ought to be the case in Texas?
I support traditional marriage between one man and one woman. And I think it is unfortunate when you see judges second-guessing the decisions of elected legislatures that are elected by the people. I think marriage laws should reflect the values and mores of the citizens of the state. Now, there are states in this union where the voters have chosen to adopt gay marriage. And under our system of federalism, we've got 50 states. We've got people where the values and the mores of citizens in Texas vary from those in Florida or New York or Vermont or California. And I think that's the way it should be. You know, Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis referred to that as laboratories of democracy. But I don't think we should have judges stepping in and saying, we're going to disregard the preferences of democratically elected legislatures. I think that should be up to the people.
All right. Here's a question I wish we had gotten to in our time together. Ran out of time for it. I'm glad we have a question from the audience. What is your proposal to fix the immigration system? Questioner says, I'm sure you agree we have a broken system that's not working properly, so what would you do affirmatively to fix it?
That's a great question. It's a very important question.
Yeah.
And the premise is exactly right. And this actually illustrates the point we were talking about before about the divide between Washington and the country. If you get outside of Washington, there is bipartisan agreement on a great many aspects of immigration. That there is widespread bipartisan agreement that our immigration system is broken, as the questioner observed. There is widespread bipartisan agreement that we've got to get serious about securing the borders, about finally stopping the problem of illegal immigration.
Yep.
And there is widespread bipartisan agreement that we need to improve and streamline our legal immigration system, make it work better so that we can not just welcome, we can celebrate legal immigrants. So now what does that mean specifically? Well, I think the way Congress should address immigration reform is it should focus on the areas of bipartisan agreement. If we drafted legislation that reflected those areas, that secured the borders, that put in place strong E-Verify, that fixed the problem of illegal immigration, and at the same time that improved and streamlined legal immigration, that would sail through Congress. Unfortunately, that has not been the approach that has proceeded in Congress. And during the Gang of Eight bill, when it was in the Senate, I spent a great deal of time on the Judiciary Committee trying to improve that bill and trying to make it where it would actually work and fix the problem. I introduced a whole series of amendments trying to fix the problem. So I had one amendment that would have put real teeth in the border security. As it's drafted, the Gang of Eight bill would not be effective in stopping illegal immigration. The amendment I introduced would triple the Border Patrol, would increase fourfold the fixed-wing aircraft, the helicopters, the technology, would put in place strong E-Verify. Every Senate Democrat on the Judiciary Committee voted against that amendment.
Yeah.
I also had two amendments, Evan, that would improve and streamline legal immigration. And I'll note there has been virtually no reporting on the work I did to expand and improve legal immigration other than, and I want to give a shout-out to you guys, other than the Tribune. And I suppose it countered the media narrative the media narrative that was trying to be painted is that Republicans oppose immigration. And I don't think that's true generally, but at least with me, it is very much not the case. Indeed, Evan, there is no stronger advocate of legal immigrants in the U.S. Senate than I am. And so I had two amendments on legal immigration. One was focused on high-tech workers, H-1B, temporary high-skilled workers. The current cap is 65,000. The Gang of Eight bill makes a modest improvement and increases that to 110,000. The problem is we filled the current cap in 5 days. Every year we educate tens of thousands of students from all around the world, and they get graduate degrees in U.S. universities, including the University of Texas. They get graduate degrees in math and computer science and engineering, and then we send them back to their countries. They start companies there. They create jobs, and they compete against us. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Right.
So I introduced an amendment to increase the H-1B cap fivefold, from 65,000 to 325,000. When I introduced that, every single Senate Democrat on the Judiciary Committee voted against it. And they said, listen, we cut a deal. We sat down with the union bosses. We cut a deal. We can't increase it anymore. I think that was a real mistake. I introduced another amendment to double the current cap of legal immigrants from 675,000 to 1.35 million, to double it, to streamline the system, to reduce the cost, to reduce the bureaucracy, to reduce the per-country caps, which right now heavily discriminate against several countries, including especially Mexico, to eliminate those caps altogether. Again, every single Senate Democrat on the Judiciary Committee voted against it. Now, I bet you if someone just reads the newspaper, you have no idea that every single Senate Democrat voted against increasing legal immigration. But that's in fact what they did on the Judiciary Committee. And then the last two amendments I introduced were focused on those who are here illegally. And I think the most divisive aspect of this entire immigration debate is amnesty for those who are here illegally. And in particular, a pathway to citizenship for those who are here illegally. And in my view, there is no chance the House of Representatives is going to pass a pathway to citizenship for those who are here illegally. There are not 218 votes. I think the Obama White House knows that, and I think the Senate Democrats know that. And their insistence upon that, I believe, was intended to be and is in fact a poison pill to kill the entire bill. I mean, the reason, and I'm very saddened by what's happened on immigration in Washington, I think the intention of the Obama White House was to jam it through the Senate, and they had the votes to do that, and then have it crash and burn in the House so they can use it as a partisan issue in 2014 and 2016.
Blame you guys.
Exactly.
Blame you guys.
And so I introduced an amendment in the Senate Judiciary Committee that eliminated the pathway to citizenship, that said you're here illegally. I think a pathway to citizenship is profoundly unfair to the millions of legal immigrants who followed the rules. I think it also encourages more illegal immigration. And I think it dooms the bill. If you want to pass the bill, you've got to take that out. Now, notably, Evan, the amendment I introduced, it didn't alter the bill's underlying work permits for those who are here illegally. So it's still, the underlying bill still allowed those who are here illegally to have some form of legal status, but no path to citizenship. And it was really quite striking. I thought the clarifying moment of the entire debate was the response to that amendment. New York Senator Chuck Schumer looked at me and said, if there is no citizenship, there can be no reform. And Evan, I actually took the chance to thank him. I said, listen, I appreciate your candor. What you have just told the committee is that you have an overarching partisan political objective. And if you cannot get 100% of that overarching partisan political objective, you are willing to do nothing, zero, to secure the borders and stop illegal immigration. You're willing to do nothing, zero, to improve high-tech immigration and meet the needs of the high-tech industry that desperately needs skilled workers. You're willing to do nothing, zero, to meet the needs of farmers and ranchers that need agricultural workers.
Yep.
And most tellingly, you're willing to do nothing, zero, for the 11 million people who are here illegally. You're saying to them, stay in the shadows. You get no legal status whatsoever. If you can't get 100% of your partisan political objective, you'll leave them just where they are. Now, listen, I think that's profoundly cynical. I think that's wrong. But that right now has been the approach of the Senate Democrats and, unfortunately, of the Obama White House. I hope it changes. I don't want it to remain that way.
All right. Senator, we're out of time. You've given us an enormous amount of time, especially given the week you had, and we appreciate so much your willingness to talk to us. So on behalf of everybody here in the audience you cannot see, thank you so much for being our opening keynote conversation. We appreciate it. And Senator, we'll see you back in Texas soon.
Thank you, Evan. It was great to be with you, and I'm sorry we had run out of time. I had intended at the end to read everybody The Cat in the Hat, so maybe next time.
Okay, very good. Senator, thanks very much. Appreciate it. All right.